If you asked a New Testament believer who'd been raised on the Torah which Old Testament leader came to mind, one of the first names they would mention would be Moses.
Oh, but look, there's our fearless leader, Moses. He's doing his part. Look, him. Take cover!
Although Moses may be most well remembered for being the man who spoke to God on Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments listed in Exodus 23 through 17, we'd be misguided to forget his flaws. Moses, the man who raised his arm and beckoned the Red Sea to split into two, had also murdered an Egyptian and fled into the wilderness. Moses, the man who boldly asked God to see his face, had also started out too insecure in his own speaking ability to speak to Pharaoh himself and instead spoke through the words of his brother, Aaron. Moses, the prophet of God who led the Israelites out of Egypt through the desert and into the promised land in the book of Exodus, did not himself enter the land due to his own disobedience. Moses is well remembered as a great leader despite his failings because he turned his focus back to God and recommitted his ways to that obedience. When Moses was told by a mentor, his father-in-law Jethro, that he was doing too much himself and needed to put some of that responsibility on others, recruiting leaders to take some of the work off of his own plate, we see him accept the advice and apply it, knowing that the wisdom of an older man was worthy of heeding. Moses, as the one chosen by God to give his words to the people of Israel, was great at sharing hope. When Israel had left Egypt and were led into the wilderness, unsure of what their future looked like, Moses' voice was the one that God used to assure them that they would be his treasured possession among all the peoples, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Part of Moses' job was to share the promises of God and thus keeping Israel's focus on the promised land they were to inherit. Early on in their journey, when the Israelites see that they have no food or water, Moses turns to God and through the miracles of manna, quail, and water from a rock, showed them how the Lord can provide no matter the circumstances. Moses earned the trust of the nation of Israel by showing his compassion in the time he spent each day sitting with them and listening to their concerns and complaints, offering them wisdom from the Lord. Moses, furthermore, went above and beyond by advocating for them to God when God grew angry with the nation's disobedience, proving that Moses cared for the people he led. Moses understood that the people he were leading were prone not only to complaining, but to disobedience as well. After Moses' first visit to speak to Pharaoh, Pharaoh enforces extra labor on the Israelites. The Israelites were very quick to turn and complain against Moses. In a moment of doubt, Moses laments to the Lord that the very people he came to help now hate him. However, when called to return to Pharaoh, not just once more, but 10 more times, Moses agrees, understanding that the same God who kept his promise to Abraham will deliver this people. Moses also recognized that the Israelites had spent their entire lives as slaves in an unholy land. Having been surrounded by false gods, idols, and immoral ways, the Israelites had little idea of what it meant to be holy, let alone what it meant to live a holy life dedicated and faithful to the one true God. Perhaps this was part of the reason that Moses took time to sit and settle their disputes. A large part of Moses' job was listening to God's instructions to learn what it meant to be a nation unlike the Gentile ones that surrounded them. This part of his job is what we see written down in the Torah, specifically in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses also understood that the Israelites had a fear of God, not just in holy awe and reverence, but in the way that one is afraid of the dark. The Israelites didn't know God, and they feared what they did not know. For this reason, Moses continued to point them to the bigger picture that was unfolding through God's blessings, miracles, and the law. Moses' biggest challenge as the leader of the Israelite people was to get them to shed their identity of slavehood and put on their new identity as the holy nation to the living God. As previously discussed, the Israelites had lived their entire lives as slaves. They had never lived outside of Egypt and had been under Egypt's yoke their entire lives. In fact, the only one that we know of among the people of Israel at this time who had not lived under Pharaoh's thumb had been Moses himself, who grew up in Pharaoh's house and then later lived in the wilderness. Moses, by sharing the word of the Lord, often strategically pointed the Israelites to the past to remind them of the movements of God's hand and their story so far. A great example of this we see in Exodus 15, 1-21, when Moses sings of God's accomplishments regarding their exodus. I sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. Moses, when sharing the law that God has given to his people, often points to the past strategically to show them why these guardrails matter. On multiple accounts, he reminds the Israelites not to suppress the foreigner or the sojourner, for they were sojourners themselves in the land of Egypt. Moses also points forward, giving warnings of what will happen to the nation if they disobey the rules gifted by God. The Gentile nations shall not dwell in your lands, lest they make you sin against God, for if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. We read later that this ended up being true. In the book of Judges, The Israelites go through a repeated pattern of bowing down to idols of other nations, doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord, finding themselves enslaved to those same nations, only to turn back to God at their darkest moments. They would be rescued, only to turn back to those idols soon after. Moses' warning was a vital one, but his actions did more for them. Moses accomplished a lot while they were in the deserts. Moses, under the direction of God, arranged a series of systems to help not only the current generation to keep the law, but the generations to come as well. By writing down the laws that we see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, Moses sets up a way for future generations to find the word of God and thus understand the rules. Through Moses' obedience to lead the team that constructed the tabernacle, the people that crafted its furnishings, and the team designed by God to be in charge of transporting it, he helped create a way for the people to commune with God and to understand how they could enter his presence since they were unholy. These rules that were recorded by Moses, either by his own hand or by the hand of a scribe, we later see help David bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. David had first attempted to regain the Ark. He and his men loaded it onto a cart, although the law states that it must be carried on the shoulders from the men of Levi. As a result of this disobedience, the Ark begins to slip from the cart, causing a man named Uzzah to try and steady it. Uzzah died. For that which is unholy cannot live when interacting with that which is holy. David, after reading the law of Moses, instructs his men that only those from the tribe of Levi were to carry the ark. David states that, because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us. Without his obedience and foresight to write down the words of the Lord, David would have been unable to correct his mistake. It also bears necessary to mention that after the Israelites' exile, the prophet Ezra reads the law of Moses before an assembly to reteach them the rules that God had intended for them to follow and guide the people back to holiness. Moses resolved many conflicts with the Israelites, often by taking their problems directly to the Lord or to his written law. When the Israelites cried out to Moses after leaving Egypt, fearing that they would die in the wilderness at the hands of the Egyptians who were now in pursuit of them, Moses' first response was to say, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord." Moses knew from his experiences confronting Pharaoh that there was no foundation more firm than that of the Lord their God. Moses was also very vocal about his mistakes, reminding the Israelites that his mistakes came at a cost just as theirs did. Moses recorded in the book of Deuteronomy that God told him, "You shall see the land before you, but you shall not go there, into the land that I am giving to the people of Israel." This transparency, this admittance of his own failings, offered the Israelites a chance to see that if Moses, the man whose face shone after his time in the presence of the living God, could fail, then they could too, but perhaps they too could seek to be as obedient as he was. Moses had been a murderer who fled his crime and returned unable to speak to the crowd, and now he stood before them as a strong leader and a prophet of God. If God could use Moses in such unimaginable ways, who is to say that they could not be transformed too? A leader requires people to follow them. As stated in strengths-based leadership, you are only a leader if people follow. This rings especially true for Moses. If the people of Israel had continued to hold the disdain they first held from him after Pharaoh imposed the law that they were to make bricks without straw being provided, Moses would have never led them out of Egypt. However, Moses' obedience and growth in his position qualified him as a leader, for they quite literally followed him out of Egypt and into the desert. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. A leader can't do everything. Moses was quick to ask God for someone to fill in the gaps that he couldn't yet fill. When called to speak to Pharaoh, Moses admitted that he wasn't great at speaking. As Blackaby put it, a team member can shine in one setting yet stumble in another. Gallup agrees when they state, effective leaders surround themselves with the right people and build on each person's skills. Furthermore, a leader keeps their team looking forward. Moses did nothing if not consistently remind the Israelites where they were heading. Blackaby reminds us of this as well when he said, "It's the leader's responsibility to keep the team centered on its mission." The Bible echoes this while reminding us that our mission is to become more like our Savior. So run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Thank you. This is the post-credit thing, I guess. Hi, I'm Abby. I'm currently in college getting a Christian studies degree, in effort to get my ASL interpreter's license. If you're interested in anything like this or not like this or funny or I don't know, I'm doing a lot of video essay stuff right now because I'm in college and writing essays and I just have ideas. This one is from a college class. I have some that will very obviously not be from a college class because I'm going to a Christian college and they would not have me watching or reading The Hunger Games, but be on the lookout for that one. I'm all over the place, but if you want to check out any of my writing, I have a bunch of stuff up on my website, abhamauthor.com. You can check out all of my stuff there. I am going to be putting some of my essays, questions, and stuff up on the website. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's not my job to question God's commands. It's my job to listen and obey. And today's command is pretty simple. As long as I hold up the staff of God during the battle, Israel will prevail. If I lower the staff, Amalek will prevail. And you look at this staff and you think, yeah, simple enough. You could hold this over your head all day. Right?